Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 14th class in this series. We have 10 more to go. Well, yeah, 10 after tonight. So, all right. So we're going to begin as usual with a recitation of prayers. Let me get them on the screen. And as before, we'll do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha just once instead of 3 times as is indicated on the slide. And then we'll carry on with the other prayers. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And we'll do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hidam Guru Radna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And refuge and bodhicitta, which we'll do first time in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam ba jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog Sangye chodang soki choknam ba jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. All right, let's do a short meditation as usual before we begin. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit using the breath as your meditation object for the first few minutes. And then we'll set our motivation together. I'll come in and lead you in that after a few minutes of silent meditation. So we'll start now. Now let's set our motivation by doing a short reflection on where we're at in regard to this text on the Tathagata essence. We're working with the 10 presentations, which, as you recall, pertains to gaining an understanding of the clear light nature of mind, meaning that the mind is by its very nature pure, not with the stains that we currently possess in our minds, because those stains don't exist inherently. The mind doesn't exist inherently. Therefore, within the sphere of this understanding of the clear light nature of mind, all of what afflicts us, all the delusions, especially the root of ignorance, as well as all the other obscurations, can be completely removed. And in particular, we've been working with this 9th presentation on immutability. The fact then that this suchness, the emptiness of the mind, is a constant throughout the unenlightened state, the state that we are all in currently, continuing to be under the control of our karma and delusions, going from life to life in samsara. That suchness, that emptiness of our minds is identical to those beings who have begun the process of purification. The bodhisattvas in particular, who have removed some level of the obscurations through their direct insight into the reality of themselves and their minds, into the topic of emptiness. So the suchness is the same, the emptiness is the same. And moreover, as we're going to be exploring tonight, it's also the same in regard to the state of complete purification, buddhahood. There is no differentiation between the emptiness of the minds of any of these beings. They are all equally in the nature of clear light, pure at their deepest level. So when we set our motivation, we want to do it within that understanding that what will allow for this transformation to occur is the emptiness of the mind. The fact that the mind doesn't have any inherent stains. Therefore, everything that afflicts us and afflicts all sentient beings can be removed because it's contrary to the true nature of the mind. So when we set the motivation of bodhicitta, we do that with the understanding that enlightenment is absolutely possible for ourselves as well as for all sentient beings, because we possess Buddha nature, specifically the naturally abiding Buddha nature, the emptiness of our own minds that will allow for that entire process of transformation to occur. So set your motivation within that understanding. So we've had a little bit of a break from our teachings, and it was a wonderful retreat with Geshe-la. I heard I was away teaching at other centers the last few weekends, so couldn't join all of you, but sorry that I couldn't. I hear again it was quite nice. So we are again working on this 10 presentations, which is the first major section of this text. And then we're going to go on, probably we'll finish the 10 presentations tonight or the very beginning of next week. But then we'll go on to the 9 similes, which is kind of working with the companion thought, as I mentioned in the meditation. First, the 10 presentations are to show us the clear light nature of the mind, to show that the mind is by its very nature pure. Then we go on to look at the fact that the adventitious stains, the defilements, can all be removed. And these two things, are, of course, go together. Because of the emptiness of the mind, things can be removed. And the fact that things can be removed speaks to the emptiness of the mind. So it's not like there's a complete separation of these two. Nonetheless, these are two distinct ideas that are being set out within this text. So let's go to, well, first I want to go back to the chart just to review in brief this topic of the 9th presentation of immutability. in the far right-hand column there. It says immutable, as we said in the meditation to some degree, does not mean that the mind does not change, but means that the nature of the mind does not change. Again, the final nature of the mind throughout all of these stages of development is emptiness. The nature of the mind always remains as it is, whether the stains have not been removed at all, again, the state of ordinary beings, whether the stains have been partially removed, which here we're using mainly the Arya Bodhisattvas as the example, though obviously for hearers, Arya hearers and Arya solitary realizers, they are also in that category. And then the third category, whether the stains have been completely removed, which is for an Arya Buddha, a Buddha who has fully accomplished the complete purification of their minds. So again, we talked about the first two, which was the first was the immutable during the impure state. That's in the third column there. I won't go through that again. Then we went into the second category, which was what we covered these last time 3 weeks ago. The Tathagata essence is immutable during the pure and impure state, meaning that the mind is pure to some degree by virtue of having removed some level of the obscurations, but is still impure because it's still together with some level of obscuration. We get to page 9 is where we have the presentation of the final part of this, that the Tathagata essence is immutable during the pure state. So there are 4 qualities that we're going to be looking at. And there's a lot more to this section than what's on here. Well, these are the main points that are here. There's quite a few verses with regard to this. But in essence, we have the immutability being indicated by these 4 qualities that are possessed by the Dharmakaya. And we'll go into that in more detail. First, that it is permanent. And by permanent, we don't mean in the sense of not changing moment by moment, where we normally talk about permanent. Rather, in the next column, as it shows, permanent means that it has no birth and death through karma and afflictions or the latencies of afflictions, since it has inexhaustible qualities that are unending. Again, there is no kind of process of going through some sort of transformation from life to life, like there is for not just ordinary sentient beings, but even for arhats and those who have attained the high grounds, the pure grounds of the bodhisattva path, who do still have a mental body, and that mental body will pass away and they take rebirth again within that, even though they've completely gotten rid of the afflictive obscurations. We talked about that previously. That's going to come into play again tonight. Then secondly, it's constant. And constant here means it's an unfailing refuge because it will abide continuously without end. So we can rely upon the Buddha as a perfect ultimate refuge because the Buddha continues to abide. There's no, falling away of the Buddha. And it's the one thing to recall is, when we attain these high states of realization, there's no going back. You don't become a Buddha and then fall from grace and become a sentient being again. That state is unending. It is constant. The third is peace, which is referring to it being non-dual. It has no mistaken appearances of true existence, which are those what is caused by the knowledge obscurations, the obstructions to omniscience, and a continuous non-conceptual realization of suchness. The Buddha's mind, as we've discussed before, is non-conceptual in its nature. There is no thought process going on in the way that we think about things through a meaning generality and so on. The Buddha's mind knows all phenomena at all times directly in a non-conceptual way. Fourth, it is unchanging. It is not born from afflicted or non-afflicted karma, again, like the ordinary beings like ourselves who are born from afflicted karma, or the beings who have attained some level of purity of the affliction of the obstructions by removing all the afflictive obstructions, and continue again to have a mental body and so on. And it, of course, is not subject to death because there is no death in that state of Buddhahood. There might be exhibiting death in terms of the being that you are emanating as, but you don't actually die. So that's all that is here for this one, again, for the chart. Let's go to the text. And here we're on page 156, immutable during the totally pure state. We have a little link being set out here, the verse describing the totally pure state, and it gives that actual verse, which is the teaching on this concept, verse 78. The Dharmakaya of the Tathagatas in the totally pure state is immutable. Why? Because of being endowed with the qualities of inexhaustibility. It is the refuge of migrators because it is continuous and without end, and is always without the two extremes of deprecation and superimposition, which are how our minds through conceptuality distort reality, and without conceptuality. And then the fourth is in the nature of not being subject to destruction because it is not formed by karma. So we have all four of them being indicated here. It's immutable because of what is said in the second line, being endowed with the qualities of inexhaustibility. In our text we've been using, in the chart at least, we use the word permanent. And then because of being endowed, or I'm sorry, it is the refuge of migrators because it is continuous and without end. And that's the second one in regard to it being constant. Then the third is in that next line, the end of the second line, is always without the two extremes of deprecation and superimposition and without conceptuality, which refers to it being at peace, being no longer dual. And then the last one, not subject to destruction. Okay. So let's go into the explanation of this. We'll get clearer about these various qualities and what they're referring to. This is the root-like verse. Remember, each of these started with a root-like verse, and then there's other verses that sort of comment on it. The totally pure state, the Dharmakaya of the Tathagatas, is a permanent phenomenon. Again, not in the sense of not changing momentarily, but rather having some inexhaustibility, that it continues to be here in an unending way. And the reason being given here is because it is unconditioned in the sense of being an attainment whose ultimate nature is not the mutability of the mental body created by the ground of the imprints of ignorance and the non-afflicted karma in which a former body is abandoned and a later body gained. So just speaking to the fact that, again, Buddhas are not subject to this process that we've, again, touched on briefly. I skipped over some of the commentary that pertained to that because it got a bit complicated. But essentially, all of these beings, and especially we're talking here about Arya Bodhisattvas who have attained the pure grounds, they have this mental body that is indicative of them having removed the afflictive obscurations, and it's arising through uncontaminated karma. But it does have to go through a process of arising and then disintegrating and dying, and then they have to take another mental body and so on. That shows that they haven't attained the state of perfect Buddhahood because they don't have this kind of permanent, in the sense of unending and not exhausting form of existing. Once you get to the Buddhahood and you have the Dharmakaya of the Buddha, all of the various ways that Buddhas manifest, you have a kind of unending nature to that is not there prior to that. So again, we'll get into that in more detail as we go through this. Goes on to conclude that first point, saying this is because the Dharmakaya is possessed of ultimate qualities that are by nature unending. You know, all the qualities that you have when you attain enlightenment are fully developed, and they don't change. They don't exhaust themselves. They are unending. They can continue to abide to remove all sentient beings from samsara, to bring them to the state of Buddhahood. Secondly, it is the ultimate unfailing refuge for living beings. Because in its natural purity, it is also a body pure of all adventitious defilement, which will abide continuously and without end. This is speaking to the fact that it is kind of constant as a abiding factor because it has attained not just the natural purity that we all have, which isn't really attained, it is naturally there. It moreover has the purity of the adventitious stains. So this is again how we are going to be relating to the Dharmakaya in terms of having those this quality as well. By the way, one thing I might mention is that actually it's in another part, I think, where Geshe Jhampa Gyaltsen talks about this being the nature truth body. But I would question, I mean, you know, in terms of sometimes it is kind of mostly referring to the nature truth body simply because we're talking about the suchness of the mind. And the suchness of the mind, while we are unenlightened, is the naturally abiding lineage. But when we are enlightened, it becomes the nature truth body. But nonetheless, you can't talk about it as being completely divorced from the qualities of the wisdom truth body, the Dharmakaya. But anyway, I just been pointing out that sometimes when the term Dharmakaya is used in this section in particular, we might see it referring to the nature truth body, because we're mainly working with the suchness of the mind, and that's the suchness of the mind for a Buddha. Continuing that last sentence then in that paragraph, this is because if this purity, freed from all adventitious defilement, were to later change, it could not be the ultimate refuge for sentient beings, right? You want this unchanging kind of essence that is unending, that is continuing to possess the same qualities. That is how we find the Buddha refuge to be a reliable refuge, is through that abiding, continuing, being constant. The third one, again, on our chart, it was peace. And this is the next sentence. It is naturally free from the two extremes of deprecation and superimposition. And there's a footnote for that. Being used here in the sense of denigration by denial of a particular existence, and by superimposition by the erroneous positing of some level of existence. Remember, these are kind of the two extremes to some degree that we get caught up in. But a Buddha, of course, wouldn't be engaging in anything like that, because they've completely removed not only those erroneous thoughts, but also conceptuality itself. And it continues then saying, why? Because with all error at an end, it is a body dwelling without conceptuality in suchness. This explains how at peace means that it is naturally at peace, and yet also pacified of all adventitious defilement. Again, we have our natural purity and our adventitious purity in regard to the nature truth body. These are the two components of the nature truth body. So that's at peace, again, meaning that it is kind of without that sort of duality and so on, mistaken appearances, what have you, and without any conceptuality that would engage in mistaken conceptuality. Fourth, it is unconditioned, or we called it unchanging, or even sometimes the word is used unalterable, by either afflicted or non-afflicted phenomena, and is therefore a phenomenon not subject to destruction, because by its nature it is not formed by karma. And this also explains the meaning of unalterable. Again, was the translation term used there. Unchanging, unconditioned. The idea is that it's no longer under the control of any other factors. It's kind of free of all of those. So again, at times it's talking mostly about kind of the other experiences of the Buddha in terms of the Dharmakaya, and then the wisdom truth body and the manifestations. But there are certainly times when it appears to be about the natural nature truth body, which again is the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha, as well as the purity of adventitious stains. Let's go on to verse 79. Verse 79 spells out this in terms of, it says indirect teaching by negation. What it's saying is that we can teach these topics as well by what is being negated, what it is that you are free of in terms of those four qualities when you have attained this pure state that is kind of, again, immutable in terms of the suchness of the mind of the Buddha is the same as the suchness of the minds of beings with impurities. So verse 79 says, there is no birth. That refers to the first of the qualities. There is no death, second quality. There is no harm, or Geshe Jumpa Gyaltsen talked about this being illness. But I mean, obviously there's no illness, but we're talking about, any kind of harm or lessening of the experience of the Buddha, of those beings, that is gone when you attain Buddhahood. And then no aging. So in this way, we have kind of the four main things that are generally set out: no birth, no illness, no aging, no death. I mean, these are all kind of being indicated here as what you are free of, and they can correspond in the order that they're in to the four qualities we just looked at. Therefore, the Dharmakaya of the Tathagatas is permanent, constant, at peace, and unalterable. Again, that's where they correlate those four. So the commentary, not only does it not move from birth to birth through the power of affliction, it does not take birth in the form of a mental body, again, like those high-level bodhisattvas. Secondly, not only is there no death through the power of affliction, which of course is what happens to ordinary beings, there's no death by inconceivable transformation. I think we touched on this term very briefly, inconceivable transformation. It's kind of like the idea is that it's very hard for us to conceive what this must be like when high-level bodhisattvas have to discard a mental body and take another mental body. Although it's done and it's not an experience of suffering by any means for those beings, it still is showing that there's not some kind of constant presence in the world because the mental body has to be discarded for the sake of a new mental body. And so this inconceivable transformation, this is how Geshe Jampa Gyaltsen describes it. It refers to the fact that the Arya Bodhisattva has as the causes for birth and death the uncontaminated karma and the imprints of ignorance. So again, you have uncontaminated karma you've created through your direct realizations of emptiness that you've attained. But then there's also the imprints of ignorance, which are the knowledge obscurations. Because you haven't abandoned them, because you're still together with this uncontaminated karma in this unenlightened state, you continue to take a mental body. Again, called inconceivable because it's hard for us to kind of get our heads around exactly what that is and why it's happening, what have you. So, all right. Then the third one, this is where this is being referred to the quality of being at peace in terms of no aging. So not only is there no aging brought on by afflicted and contaminated karma, such as what ordinary beings experience, there is no transforming aging process caused by non-afflicted karma. So again, the transformative aging process that would happen to the mental body would be there as well. Then fourth, therefore, this is teaching by negation in which aspects of immutability negate their opposing adverse circumstances. Oh, I skipped one, I think. No, I didn't. I think they're all four there. There's no birth. Yeah, no birth, no death, no harm. Maybe I skipped no harm. Not only is there no harm caused by karma and affliction, there is no harm caused by non-afflicted imprints of ignorance. Again, the harm here isn't meant to be like gross levels of suffering. It's meant to be some sort of harm in the experience of that being, that they still would go through a process of being free of the mental body they have and gaining a new mental body. Kind of there's a whole process that continues to go on as long as they're in an unenlightened state. As soon as they attain Buddhahood, they're free of all four of those. So again, that was a teaching by negation, showing that you can also be free from these various factors that point to the unsatisfactory way that sentient beings suffer, and that would still be there in some small way with regard to the bodhisattvas on the pure grounds. Now we have an indirect teaching by affirmation. So we just did negation. Now we're talking about things that are being affirmed in regard to this. Verse 80, the Dharmakaya of the Tathagatas is not born with a mental body because it is permanent, right? So it's giving kind of showing that there is still kind of a rising of the Dharmakaya in terms of the various manifestations, but it's not born with a mental body. It doesn't have that, that quality. Secondly, in the last two lines of 80, it does not die and transmigrate with inconceivable transformation because it is constant, because it's in this inexhaustible kind of state and continuing to be there for sentient beings. So there's no dying from that. Again, this is what makes it a perfect refuge. It is not harmed by the sicknesses of the subtle imprints because it is pacified. So again, we're free of everything that is caused by the subtle imprints, which again, the main thing is the false appearance of inherent existence, which blocks the perfect knowledge of the two truths simultaneously. And then fourth, in the last two lines of 81, it does not age by unaltered, non-afflicted karma because it is eternal. Because it is no longer going through some sort of transformative process by virtue of any type of karma. It's free of all those factors, even free of uncontaminated karma, at least the way that functions prior to attaining Buddhahood while you're still in the on the pure grounds. Therefore, the Dharma of the Tathagatas is permanent, constant, at peace, and unalterable. So let's go to the extensive explanation of this. Says the Tathagata Dharmakaya does not take birth with a mental body that is the nature of mind, because it is a permanent phenomenon. Here, the phenomenon negated by permanence is birth, which here refers to birth with a body whose nature is that of the mind, this mental body again. And the negation, permanence, is the absence of this kind of birth. So again, we negate birth happening by the quality of permanence. And we affirm that the being is now no longer taking rebirth with this mental body. There's no need for that in the state of Buddhahood. It's kind of a showing the lack of a full development of the mind. Once you have Buddhahood, then you no longer have the need for a mental body because you have the Rupakaya, the ways that you can manifest for being spontaneously in accord with their karma. Secondly, the Dharmakaya does not die with a death of inconceivable transformation because it is constant, right? That it is there, as was said in our chart, in that sort of continuous abiding, continuing to be here in this world, no longer going through any sort of death to go on to another existence. Especially, again, pointing out the difference between the Buddhas and the high-level bodhisattvas, the pure ground bodhisattvas. Third, the Dharmakaya is not harmed by the illnesses of the subtle imprints of ignorance because it is at peace. It is no longer together with any of these factors, has completely removed all of the appearances of true existence through removing the knowledge obscurations, and it has that non-conceptual mind that is no longer involved in superimposing, deprecating, and so on. And then it goes on to say constancy and peace are also, the second and third, are also understood from the point of view of recognizing the phenomena that would negate them and seeing their absence. Okay. And it's the final one, the fourth one. It has no aging formed by the compounding of non-afflicted karma, which is what happens again for the pure ground bodhisattvas, because it is unalterable and not subject to transformation by karma. And it's unalterable, not changing in a gross way, because of course there's no longer any involvement of afflicted or non-afflicted, uncontaminated karma. So then the concluding sentence, permanence, constancy, and so forth are explained this way and not as referring to a permanent functional phenomenon existing as an independent affirmation. We've had that phrase there a number of times, permanent functional phenomenon, which again is referring to lower tenet systems that might say that there's some sort of self that abides in that way, but this is not a tenet that we follow. So it's just simply indicating that this isn't what we mean. I think they probably in particular are trying to point that out here because we're using the term permanence in reference to the Buddha, the Dharmakaya, and yet it is not a permanent, unchanging, yet functional phenomenon. That's not how we would refer to the Buddha, that state of existence. And then we have some additional commentary, and let me look. Yeah, we're going to skip this. It just, again, repeats a lot of it and adds in some other things, a lot of phrases from, again, a Sangha's commentary. Let's go on to the next section, which is correlating the teaching with the explanation. So we first have the explanation from the sutras of the four phenomena that spell out the permanence and so on. And there is a kind of sutra reference here in this verse, verse 82, and then we'll apply the explanation to the teaching. Verse 82 says, the uncompounded base element, meaning again, the naturally abiding lineage, is to be known as permanent and so forth through two lines and likewise two lines and two lines and two lines in their respective order. Just saying that in the sutras, there are two lines for each of these four qualities. And when it says uncompounded basic element, I said the naturally abiding lineage. That's again what we're primarily investigating in this text. When you become a Buddha, as I pointed out a short while ago, it's then the nature truth body, which we would refer to still as kind of the Tathagata essence transformed, no longer being Buddha nature, but the actual body of a Buddha that we call the nature truth body. But it's the same. Again, that's the point of this whole presentation, is that the suchness, the emptiness of the mind of sentient beings, when it's naturally abiding lineage, is the same as the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha when it's the nature truth body. So let's look at the commentary on that. These meanings of permanence, constancy, peace, and inalterability, or again, unchangingness, with respect to the unconditioned sphere of the Tathagata Dharmakaya, should be known as coming from the sutras. How? Permanence is expressed by two phrases, which are the phrases of teaching and the phrases of explanation. Actually, this happens for all of these. It just means that one of them is kind of giving the teaching of that, and the other one explains it to some degree. I think that's all it is entailed in that. It's not some term I really heard even before. It's just talking about it in this context. So the first is immutable. The second is unending qualities. So with regard to permanence, it is teaching immutability, and it's doing that through explaining that it has unending qualities. Similarly, the phrases that teach and explain the quality of constancy are saying that the teaching is that it's a refuge for living beings. And then the explanation is that because it is continuously abiding and without any end, it's an endless phenomenon, eternal phenomenon. Then the two phrases that teach the third one and explain the meaning of that at peace are the teaching is that it's constantly non-dual, and the reason for that, the explanation, is because it's non-conceptual. Then finally, the fourth one, the phrases teaching and explaining inalterability are the teaching that it's not subject to destruction, and then the explanation is that that's because it's of an unconditioned nature. It no longer is conditioned by karma in any way, so death cannot occur. Aging cannot occur. It cannot be destroyed, and so on, through some deterioration. Of course, it can also not die, but anyway, that's the context that we're looking at here in regard to the fourth one. It is by these phrases that permanence and so on can be understood as taught in the sutras to be explained or quoted later. So we do get to another explanation then of this in the next verse, or two verses, 83 and 84. And there's a lot more, as I said, in this teaching than what's on that little bit of the chart that we have. Nonetheless, that's kind of focusing on the four main things, but we obviously have a lot of other things being free of these four factors of birth, death, illness, aging, and so on. So let's go ahead and look at 83. This is kind of divided up in a very similar way. The first point is the first two lines. So this again is referring to the topic of permanence. Because the Dharmakaya is endowed with limitless qualities, it has the meaning of being immutably permanent. Second, in regard to the quality of it being constant, because it is equal to the limit of samsara, it has the meaning of being a constant entity of refuge. Equal to the limit of samsara means kind of it will continue to abide all the way through the end of samsara. I don't know what happens then. The Buddha never answered that, but I imagine it would still abide, just no longer be able, to enlighten beings because that task is complete. And the third one, which has to do with being at peace, because it is in the nature of non-conceptuality, it has the meaning of pacified reality, free from duality of the two extremes. And so we no longer engage in that superimposition or deprecation because there's no conceptuality in the mind of a Buddha. Fourth, because it is endowed with the quality of not being produced by the two karmas, afflicted or non-afflicted, or sometimes we refer to that as, again, uncontaminated, it is not subject to destruction, what happens in regard to our own bodies and even the mental bodies of the high-level bodhisattvas. This is the meaning of being eternal, kind of having that unchanging, unalterable nature. So again, this just explains it in terms of each of these, very similar to what we've already looked at. So I'll read this, but we don't need to necessarily talk about it so much. First one, the Tathagata Dharmakaya is possessed of unending qualities. Again, that's the explanation, which can be summarized as the limitless qualities of the Buddha. Therefore, the teaching is that it is immutable. It is permanent, and then, kind of continuing to abide. Immutably permanent, again, was what was in the verse. The former is the phrase of explanation, again, that's why, and the latter is the phrase of teaching. So it's in a reverse order than what we saw when we looked at the previous one, on the previous page. Okay, so then these express the meaning of permanence. That concludes the first one. Secondly, we get the reasoning first, again, the explanation, and then the teaching. Because it remains until the end, it is endless, it abides eternally. At no time is it not an infallible entity of refuge. It is that for all time, for all beings. These phrases of explanation and teaching express the meaning of constancy, the second of the four qualities. Third, because it is of the nature of non-conceptuality, and that's the explanation, it is non-dual in regard to the two extremes, with all adventitious defilement removed. Again, that's the main teaching, the non-duality of that mind that is at peace. As these phrases of explanation and teaching express the meaning of being at peace. Fourth, because it possesses the quality of not being formed by afflicted and non-afflicted karma, it is a phenomenon, I think it should say, not subject to destruction by death. It's interesting because we were correlating that with aging in the previous thing when we were looking at these four. But nonetheless, death is the eventual outcome of aging, right? I suppose if you live long enough. These phrases of explanation and teaching express the meaning of inalterability. But again, there's no transformation that occurs any longer due to other factors. The body of a Buddha, the Dharmakaya, is completely free of all that kind of conditioning. I'm going to skip this application to sutra before we go on to the next of the 10 presentations, which is the indivisibility of qualities. So let's go to indivisibility on your chart. Again, this starts on page 9, or it's only on page, no, I'm sorry, it's a little bit on page 10. That's right. We have that tiny little bit of that one column. As I've been doing, I like to go to the last one first to kind of talk about that presentation in a more general way. So the 10th topic, indivisibility, it says, means that when suchness progresses to the suchness of mind free from all stains, again, buddhahood, that's what we're going to mainly be talking about here in regard to this topic of indivisibility. The suchness of the mind of an ordinary being is not different from the suchness of the mind of an Arya Buddha. And therefore, there are no divisions of suchness in this sense, right? Because suchness is the same. We've already been looking at in regard to immutability. Here we're looking at the indivisibility of the qualities once you have attained the state of Buddhahood. So there are three types of beings, it says, who become enlightened. Those who were previously hearers and become Buddhas, right? Because they finished the hearer path, they became an arhat, but then they were beckoned into the Mahayana path by a Buddha, and they complete that then subsequently. Those who were previously solitary realizers who become Buddhas, and again, they would be the same type of situation. They've attained arhatship and sort of checked out of samsara in a state of solitary peace, and then the Buddhas beckon them into the Mahayana path. And then those who were previously bodhisattvas who become Buddhas. Again, that would be all of us who haven't attained any of the states of arhatship who are entering the Mahayana from the get-go. However, on the Buddha ground, the qualities and knowledges of these three enlightened beings are not different, regardless of kind of how you got there. When you become a Buddha, the qualities are the same. And of course, the suchness of the mind is the same. I found this an interesting, kind of what's being put out in that, because frankly, I mean, some of this is really not covered that directly in the commentary, and I'm not sure who put that together or what it pertains to. But the main point, as I see it, with regard to indivisibility, is, as I was starting to allude to, was that there's an indivisibility of the qualities that are possessed when you attain Buddhahood, in terms of they kind of are all there together. You can't have one without the other. And there are initially a presentation of kind of four qualities. This is what we're going to be looking at to start with. And then there's a kind of a condensation of those into other categories. There's another sort of four that point to various qualities in a more general way. And then there's kind of bringing those down into three. It gets an interesting chapter. And I'm not sure, again, the chart itself doesn't really speak, in my mind, to the full import of that. We get that to some degree over here with regard to the second column, where we actually go into what is the main teaching being given here. But I think in terms of that fifth column or whatever, I don't see it as being as clear as some of the other presentations. So a Buddha possesses indivisibly every quality of wisdom, knowledge, and abandonment of the hearers, solitary realizers, and the Mahayanas. Again, saying that all of these various qualities are possessed by a Buddha. The Buddha's qualities are complete. There's no longer any deficiency in qualities. And as was said when we went through that explanation, it's the same regardless of how you got to Buddhahood. Once you attain that state, you have all the same qualities as any other Buddha. no Buddha's kind of one up on you. Not like Shakyamuni Buddha would have more qualities than you when you attain Buddhahood. You have the identical qualities. So the very first thing we're going to see in terms of our presentation in this chapter, this section, is the four qualities that are indivisibly possessed by a perfect Buddha. They're set out again in that second column. First is Dharmakaya, which here refers to the nature body, the ultimate reality of a Buddha's mind. Secondly, Tathagata, which refers to the exalted wisdom directly realizing that nature body or the ultimate reality. And we can say that there's also within the wisdom body, the Dharma, the wisdom truth body, the knowledge of conventional, but it's mainly talking about the knowledge of the ultimate, because a Buddha's mind is never separated from meditative equipoise on emptiness. Third, the noble truth of sensation, the ultimate truth, which is the complete abandonment of all the adventitious stains, again, which would be the afflictive obscurations and the knowledge obscurations. So we have kind of an element of cessation that is involved there. Fourth is the ultimate nirvana, the attainment of that state, which ultimate nirvana is referring to non-abiding nirvana. We've seen this term before in this course. It means a state of not abiding any longer in samsara or the solitary peace of nirvana. So the significance of that, again, this is kind of drawn from the commentary, but it's not really presented kind of identically in this way, but nonetheless, it's a good sort of explanation. It says, first, since the four qualities are indivisible from a perfect Buddha, there is no ultimate nirvana apart from the perfect Buddha. We're going to see this point being made. Even though some people attain the state of nirvana of the fundamental vehicle pathways, the hearers and solitary realizers, it's not an ultimate nirvana. This is kind of getting to the whole case of there being one final vehicle, meaning all beings will eventually travel the pathway to complete Buddhahood. They don't end up in solitary peace, the arhatship of a faux destroyer, of a hearer or a solitary realizer, because that state of being a faux destroyer or arhat is not the final nirvana. It's not ultimate nirvana. They end up in it for a good while, but they eventually again are beckoned into the Mahayana path. The next paragraph there, next sentence, since the four perfect qualities exist as potentials, indivisible from the basic element of all sentient beings, there's no sentient being who cannot attain ultimate nirvana. Again, because we have the same sort of suchness of the mind and the potential for developing the same qualities through practicing the path that the Buddha teaches on the Mahayana, we all can attain that state. So in other words, every being is destined for Buddhahood. Or I read one thing that Chogyam Trungpa, I read not too long ago, that we're all doomed for enlightenment. I like that phrase. Not to meaning that, there's some, doomed quality to it, but, inevitably we will all attain enlightenment. I guess we can have some hope then, because regardless of what we're doing or how far we think we are behind other beings in terms of our progress, we'll all get there eventually. The third section, hearers and solitary realizer arhats, although they have attained a nirvana that is the pacification of contaminated karma and afflictions, have temporarily not attained an ultimate non-abiding nirvana. So even those beings on those fundamental vehicle paths, when they attain their nirvana, which is their solitary peace, they have attained that, but they have not, for the time being, temporarily attained the ultimate nirvana. And then the last part, again, by the way, these four aren't meant to correlate, as I can tell, with the four qualities. They're just kind of an explanation based on what we see in our commentary. Since only one ultimate nirvana is taught, and since the followers of all three vehicles have the potential to attain it, only one final vehicle, the Mahayana, is taught. So again, because of the explanations that we've had, it results in the kind of conclusion that there's only one final vehicle. And we're all going to end up in the state of Buddhahood, regardless of what attainments we make on a temporary basis, such as arhatship or what have you, that those on the fundamental vehicle path attain. The next quality is going to come up in a bit. This is later in this section, where it talks about how the totality of the indivisible qualities is attained. How are all of the qualities that we talked about, those four, attained, as well as the innumerable qualities of a Buddha? They're attained by bringing to completion the practice of all six of the perfections. not just the perfection of wisdom, which of course is what removes all of the afflictive obscurations on the basis of the perfection of concentration, but rather we need generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort as well. All six of them have to be there in order to accomplish the full picture of Buddhahood. So the completion of the four qualities is not attained without depending on the special gnosis wisdom of the pure levels. Therefore, while having the potential to attain them, hearers and solitary realizer arhats are temporarily far from them. So there is a section in this, this part on indivisibility that talks about the pure grounds, the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds, and how they are essential, the kind of rounding out the qualities that become the full state of Buddhahood, imbued with all four of those that we talked about. Dharmakaya, Tathagata, and so on. All right. This will be a little bit clearer as we go through this. But this is a really interesting section. Again, although we are talking about the nature truth body and the suchness of the mind to some degree, it tends in this section to talk about the indivisibility of these qualities that are kind of together with that suchness, that nature truth body. Even though, again, it's spelled out quite directly as being about the nature truth body here and there, it also is about the qualities of the mind, a bit like the immutability section, right? Because I was mentioning the last time we were together that even though it's talking about how the suchness is immutable during these various stages of development, it seems to be more about those stages of development and what is entailed in them. We even saw this with the totally pure state tonight. The immutability of it, it didn't talk as much about the suchness being the same, but rather the qualities that exist at the time of Buddhahood and so on. So let's go into the text and see. Hopefully we can get through most of this tonight, if not all of it. That was my plan, was to get through all of it. Bottom of page 159, we're again establishing indivisibility from the qualities of freedom at the time of total purity when you've attained Buddhahood, which again is kind of an extension of that topic we just looked at, the immutability in the pure state. So the link is, this verse begins the subject of the indivisibility of the qualities of exalted wisdom and abandonment in this state of the totally pure and perfect Tathagata essence, purified of all adventitious defilement. So again, sometimes they do use the term Tathagata essence to refer to the Dharmakaya, the state of having attained enlightenment, the natural purity that exists then, as well as the adventitious purity, which again is the nature truth body. But nonetheless, Tathagata essence in general is referring to the naturally abiding lineage that we all possess, Buddha nature, and that being the main topic of this text. But these two qualities that are mentioned here, exalted wisdom and abandonment, we're going to see it coming back around to that towards the end. If we kind of take all the qualities of a Buddha and summarize them, in fact, we even have talked about this, how that very word, Sangha, these two parts that are put together. Sang means to have completely abandoned, removed, purified the mind. So again, all of the levels of abandonment are embodied in becoming a Buddha. There's nothing left to abandon. Everything has been completely abandoned, purified. In regard to Gye, we have the concept of fully developed. That's the realizations. That's the kind of wisdom aspect of it, as well as all the other qualities. Those qualities that we again saw in the chart of the other perfections that all need to be brought to their fulfillment. So we have these two things that are happening. We're removing what is kind of impure in the mind, getting rid of it, and then bringing to the forefront all of the qualities. That's what a Buddha is Sangha, having completely removed all of the impurities and having developed the qualities perfectly. Okay, so let's go on to the verse. We have the short presentation of this verse, oops, didn't want to go that far up, verse 85. Let me just get just a little further up. Got to get my cursor. Got my cursor just above it. I thought I was on it. Okay. Oops, it's not doing it. Why is it not doing it? Oh, that's strange. Okay, well, we'll see how we do this. Now I can do it with my other thing. Okay, good. Short presentation, verse 85. The perfect complete Buddha is, first, the Dharmakaya, second, the Tathagata, third, the Arya's ultimate truth, and fourth, the non-abiding nirvana. These four are just as indivisible as the sun and its rays. Later, we're going to see the same analogy being used, but in terms of the sun, its illuminating quality and the rays of light that come from it. So nonetheless, here we're talking about how you can't really say the sun and its rays are some divisible thing. We can think about them separately, but they are all part of the same phenomenon. All four of these qualities are part of the same phenomenon that we call the perfect complete Buddha. And because of the indivisibility of the qualities, there's no non-abiding nirvana apart from Buddhahood. Again, that this is the only state that is kind of the final state of attainment. I did it again. I mean, do it always with this. Try to do it with the arrows. I think that'll get me there better. All right. The perfect Buddha possesses indivisibly every wisdom, exalted wisdom, and quality of freedom of the hearer, solitary realizer, and Mahayana. These three terms are going to come back around again too. Because we could summarize everything again that is involved in the qualities of a Buddha into first wisdom, which means the wisdom of the ultimate, the profound, knowing emptiness completely. The exalted wisdom is actually referring to the knowledge of all conventionalities, which also, again, the Buddha has. Those two together are realization. Remember how I just talked about realization and abandonment. We could summarize it into ge, sang, Those are the two main things. But we can split up the realization into the awareness of emptiness and the awareness of conventional reality, conventional truths. The third, the quality of freedom, is the abandonment. So again, every single quality that is attained by a hearer, solitary realizer, and a Mahayanist, a bodhisattva, is possessed by the Buddha and more. I mean, the Buddha possesses much more because the Buddha has reached the culmination of the development of the mind. How is that? They are the ultimate Dharmakaya, pure from the beginning. They are the Tathagata, possessing the ultimate quality of directly realizing suchness. Although naturally pure, they are the ultimate abandonment of all adventitious defilement and are therefore the Arya truth of cessation, which can be summarized as the ultimate truth. And they are the non-abiding nirvana. This is like the inseparability of the disk of the sun and the rays that emerge from the sun. So again, we have all four of them indicated in there, the ultimate Dharmakaya. Remember, we saw Dharmakaya as essentially being referring to the mind of a Buddha, the wisdom mind of a Buddha, together with its emptiness. Again, in our commentary, it pointed it to being mainly the nature truth body. And we can see that kind of is involved in this, absolutely, but it's interesting because it indicates there, the pure from the beginning. It's kind of referring more specifically to the natural purity. So if we split up the nature truth body, which again is what's mainly being referred to here when we talk about Dharmakaya, we can say that the Dharmakaya again has two main divisions. It has the nature truth body and it has the wisdom truth body. The nature truth body is referring to the natural purity, which is the suchness of the mind of the Buddha, which, as we've been seeing, is the same suchness of our minds and so on. And then it has, secondly, the natural purity, or the purity of the adventitious defilements. So again, for a Buddha, there are two levels of purity that have happened. There's natural purity that is already there. I mean, we already have minds that are naturally pure. The whole Buddhist path is to get the second level of purity, the purity of adventitious defilement. So in this context, even though, again, we could say that these things kind of all come together as one package, we're specifically singling out with our kind of conceptual mind this natural purity of the nature truth body, that component of it, rather than the adventitious purity, because that's the third one, actually. So let's go back and we'll clarify this again. The very first one, which is referred to here as in this sentence, they are the ultimate Dharmakaya, pure from the beginning, right? There's never been a stain that has been inherent to the mind. They are the Tathagata, possessing the ultimate quality of directly realizing suchness. Again, that's speaking to the wisdom truth body, which is perceiving natural purity, ultimate reality, emptiness. As we saw, there's also the natural or the wisdom that is perceiving conventionalities. That's part of this exalted wisdom that when the very first sentence there, wisdom is referring to knowing the ultimate, exalted wisdom to knowing conventionalities. So again, we're not indicating it directly, but I assume it would be included, in that, because once a Buddha knows the emptiness of all phenomena, every moment through that meditative equipoise in the mind of a Buddha, you would know also by virtue of that the conventionalities that exist. Then the third, although naturally pure, they are the ultimate abandonment of all adventitious defilement and is therefore the Arya truth of cessation, which can be summarized as the ultimate truth. In other words, they have the complete cessations of all obscurations. They have the adventitious purity of the nature truth body. Again, the other component of the nature truth body. So far we have the natural purity and the first, the wisdom truth body that is knowing emptiness, ultimate truth. And then we have third, the freedom from all of the adventitious stains, that adventitious purity of the nature truth body. All of that is kind of embodied within the non-abiding nirvana. Non-abiding nirvana is, again, the state of attainment that a Buddha has, no longer abiding in either the solitary peace of nirvana or samsara and the craziness that we're all dealing with, in samsara. And those are being compared again to the disk of the sun and the rays that emerge from it. Now, which is being referred to which, I don't think it's set out that way. It's just saying that in the same way that you see that being inseparable, all four of these are inseparable because they're all imbued in the resultant state of a Buddha. So the significance of the above is that because of this indivisibility of qualities, there is no non-abiding nirvana apart from the perfect Buddha, because all of those have to be present. Kind of spelling out that these qualities are entailed in being a Buddha. Anything that doesn't have all those qualities can't possibly be a perfect Buddha. It's only non-abiding nirvana that is the state of Buddhahood. This verse teaches that four qualities, namely the Dharmakaya and its naturally pure aspect, the exalted wisdom that directly perceives this natural purity, the total abandonment of all adventitious defilement, again, that adventitious purity of the nature truth body, and the attainment of that state by the antidotal forces exist indivisibly in the Dharmakaya. Again, in this state of complete enlightenment, you have you can mentally kind of separate them out and say this is one aspect of that mind or that nature, truth, body, what have you, but they're all imbued within that. However, this is not to say that the hearers and solitary realizers do not attain an authentic nirvana, rather that the development of liberation and exalted wisdom to their ultimate degree, beyond which there can be no further development, is found only in a Buddha and not in others, and is taught for the purpose of establishing one ultimate vehicle. Right? I mentioned that earlier, and we're going to see that this is kind of the whole point, is that we then have to have confidence that there is one final result that all beings will eventually attain. Okay, so now we get into an extensive explanation. This is divided into three parts. The explanation of the logic for the indivisibility of the ultimate qualities, the significance of establishing that, which is kind of similar to what we saw, the significance of that on our chart, kind of summarizing the main points of that discussion. And then the nature of the indivisibility of the qualities and an example. That's kind of a nice little part at the end. The explanation of the logic for the indivisibility of the ultimate qualities. It starts with a question, what does this next verse teach? The answer is in two parts. Again, a short presentation and an extensive explanation. The short presentation is verse 86. In brief, the non-afflicted sphere is distinguished by four meanings and is to be known by way of four synonyms, Dharmakaya and so forth. They use the term synonyms here, but it's, I guess, not technically a synonym because it doesn't mean the exact same thing, but they're all referring to Buddhahood. And what the whole point is the indivisibility of these qualities. You can't have one without the other. They're all part and parcel of the state of the Dharmakaya. So the very short commentary on this, it says, in brief, within the non-afflicted sphere, which is a natural purity, totally devoid of adventitious defilement. Again, that's the nature truth body that has both the natural purity and the purity of the adventitious stains, are the four perfected qualities. And although they have no ultimate divisions, it should be known that there is a division into four synonyms, Dharmakaya, Tathagata, and so forth, which will be explained later. This is the short common beginning. In summary, the non-afflicted sphere. So this begins, Where am I at here now? 161. I think I've got to go up further on this page. For some reason, I don't know why this is doing this. I can't seem to get it. There's my cursor. As long as I go down this way, I think it'll be fine. Okay, so this is a short comment beginning. In summary, the non-afflicted sphere, again, he's referring to a Sangha's commentary. So I don't think we really have to go through any more of that. Now we get to the extensive explanation of this concept. What are these four taught above with four different names? The answer is under two headings. We get a root verse and then the commentary on that. So again, this is explaining how these four are indivisible. Indivisible from the qualities of the Buddha, attainment of the lineage as it is, reality that is non-deceptive and not false, and by nature at peace since beginningless time. So, because it exists indivisibly from the potential for the arising of a Buddha's qualities in the continuum of sentient beings as characterized by the naturally pure basic element, this ultimate purity is the Dharmakaya. So again, because we're starting off with the concept of naturally abiding lineage that we all have, which is the suchness of our own minds, the ultimate purity, the natural purity, is the Dharmakaya, that nature, truth, body, again, that aspect of it. Because it is an ultimate attainment of the direct realization of that suchness lineage, it is the Tathagata. Again, the Tathagata was referring to the exalted wisdom that is knowing suchness, knowing that emptiness of the mind. Because it is a phenomenon that is not false and not deceiving, and one in which all defilement has been removed, it is the Arya ultimate truth. Again, that's referring to the third quality, which is the purity of adventitious stain, because there's no longer any falsity or deception in the mind. You've removed all the defilements, all the obscurations. It becomes the Arya ultimate truth. This is a weird phrase. I don't see it so many places, but it's kind of just the final cessation. This is the thing, it's the complete, total cessation of all the obscurations. That's the kind of Arya truth. I think it's kind of meant to be an Arya truth, one of the Four Noble Truths in an ultimate way. It's the complete cessations of all the obscurations due to that purity of adventitious defilement that has occurred then. The fourth one, because it is an abandonment attained by application of antidotes, even though by nature it has been at peace since beginningless time, it is the final result, the non-abiding nirvana. So again, just another way of continuing to look at these four qualities from the vantage point of some level of explanation of what is entailed in attaining them. So there's an application to scripture here. I'm going to actually skip over that. We're going to go on to page 162, and we're going to skip the very top of that because this is a continuation of that, correlating the teaching with this from the scripture. Let's look at the significance of establishing this indivisibility. This is the second main topic here, and again, it's similar to what we saw on the chart. Just kind of again a summarization on the chart of the various points from this. So we once more start with, what does this verse teach? We have two parts, the root text and the commentary. Verse 88 is the root text. Thoroughly complete enlightenment in all aspects, abandonment of defilements with their imprints, buddhahood and non-abiding nirvana are ultimately non-dual. So we're getting kind of four new things here that can be correlated, with with that to some degree, but we're talking about things in a slightly different manner in regard to this presentation. And that's going to be set out in this first paragraph. This goes back to the idea of realization and abandonment. Remember, if we take all the qualities and bring them down to the two essential components, they're involved in some level of realization, yay, and some level of abandonment or complete abandonment, which is sangye, and together being kind of the essence of Buddhahood. So this first paragraph, because the Tathagata Dharmakaya exists indivisibly with the quality of insight, which is the insight of enlightenment realizing all aspects of all dharmas, and with the quality of abandonment of defilement and its imprints, the perfect Buddha and the non-abiding nirvana are ultimately non-dual. So it's kind of saying, because the Dharmakaya exists with these two qualities, the quality of insight, which is the culmination of full realization, the insight of enlightenment, realizing all aspects of all dharmas, meaning all conventional truths, all ultimate truths. So that's the realization component that is together with the Tathagata Dharmakaya and with the quality of abandonment, of defilement and its imprints. So everything has been abandoned. Again, that's the Sangha part. And then we have the Gye part, the full development of all the qualities. So because the Tathagata Dharmakaya exists indivisibly with those two, the perfect Buddha and the non-abiding nirvana are ultimately non-dual. Again, there's no differentiation there either. They're all indivisible, kind of abiding together. So it says in this next paragraph, alternatively, the subjects of the verse can be taken individually. The insight of enlightenment, realizing all phenomena being the first phenomenon, the abandonment of defilement and its imprints being the third or second, and then nirvana being the third, are all ultimately non-dual. Everything is kind of in a state of indivisibility because they all abide together. But I don't think it really matters a whole lot with regard to that. That second paragraph, I think, again, the way that I explained it in terms of saying that because the Dharmakaya possesses these two qualities of realization and abandonment, the buddhahood and non-abiding nirvana, all the things we talked about are there indivisibly. They're non-dual. Okay, so why? Because these four synonyms of the non-afflicted sphere are gathered as one into the Tathagata basic element. Again, the Tathagata essence that is the nature truth body of a Buddha. All right, now we have the nature of the indivisibility of the qualities and an example. And this is kind of a nice one, very poetic, I think, in terms of, I think this is where we get into this, or maybe that's coming yet. I'm sorry, that's coming yet. Okay, so this verse 89, again, I can't put it too much further down. Sorry, it's so low on the screen, but that's at the end of that page. So liberation is inseparable in its character from all aspects, the innumerable, the inconceivable, and the quality of being without defilement. So we have another set of four here. The first one is all aspects, meaning the every kind of excellent quality being complete. The second one is innumerable, meaning that there are innumerable qualities that have been can be set out, all the very defined individual qualities that a Buddha has. That they have an inconceivable nature, meaning that it's difficult to understand their powers and number for us mere mortals. And then the quality of being without defilement, again, being having that quality of abandonment. So it says there that this, whatever is this liberation, is also the Tathagata, whatever has these four qualities. So it's kind of interesting. It's a little hard thing to kind of sort of sort through because we have different presentations of things that do have a kind of correlation. But nonetheless, here we're kind of in this whole second part of it, mostly looking at things in terms of the two main things of realization and abandonment. So let's correlate this to this first paragraph here. The first two qualities that were mentioned in that verse, the quality of possessing all aspects, meaning that every kind of excellent quality is complete. And secondly, beyond number, limitless, numberless, means limitless examples of clearly defined individual qualities. These two, the first two, demonstrate the vastness of the qualities, which once more is in relation to the awareness, the wisdom, knowing the vast, which is one level of realization. Remember, when we talk about the realizations in the mind of a Buddha, part of them is knowing the vast, meaning all conventionalities. The second part is knowing the profound or the deep, that which is depth. That's the third quality mentioned there. Unconceivable means it is difficult to understand their powers and number. This refers to the quality of depth. So the wisdom knowing the profound is referred to here as having unconceivable qualities because it's difficult to understand the powers and number of the mind of a Buddha that knows the emptiness of all phenomena, the ultimate truths, all the ultimate truths that exist. The fourth one is in regard to abandonment. So the first three, the first two are included in the vast, the third is in the profound, and to get all three of those together are within the component of realization. When we talk about a Buddha, we again talk about Gye, completely cultivated all the qualities, the full realization of the qualities, knowing both the profound, emptiness, and the vast, the conventional reality. Without defilement, the fourth means the abandonment of all defilements and their imprints. It refers to the quality of abandonment. So essentially, we have three qualities being mentioned here: the quality of vastness, the quality of depth, and the quality of abandonment. Again, the first two being part of realization. The third, standing on its own, is the quality of abandonment, the Sang part of Sangye. Hope that was clear. Again, I maybe should have put a chart together for this one, but the liberation, indivisible in character from these four, such a liberation is the Tathagata. If you have all four of these, again, the complete knowledge of all aspects and the limitless numbers of them, that's the vast. You have the unconceivable understanding of all of the objects of the knowledge of the profound, the deep, and then together with that, the abandonment of all defilements. That's the liberation of the Tathagata. That is the Tathagata. Therefore, the teaching that the liberation within the continuums of the hearer and solitary realizer arhats is the ultimate liberation is a teaching with an underlying meaning. There are apparently sutras where the Buddha did teach that there is three final vehicles, that when you get to the end of the hearer path and you attain the path of no more learning on the hearer path, the state of arhatship, that's the end of the line. When you get to the end of the solitary realizer path, that's the end of the line. When you get to the end of the Bodhisattva path, that's the end of the line. But it's not taught in the final teachings of the Buddha that we are relying upon in that way. There's one final vehicle. Again, even if you attain the arhatship, the goal of these two other paths, you end up in that state of solitary peace and then are eventually pulled into the Mahayana path to complete your development because you haven't attained the complete fulfillment of all other qualities or the complete abandonment. So you haven't gotten to Sangye. You're kind of partially Sang and partially gay. You haven't gotten there yet. This is the whole point of this. And the next section, I'm going to kind of skip over it to some degree, but I want to talk about what's covered in it. First of all, this idea that then the reason why the Buddha taught it this way is because he says that there are some beings who, for example, you want to get them all to a final destination, but you realize that most of them don't have the stamina to go the full distance, or some portion of them don't at least. So you conjure up a city that can be like a temporary place where people can go to get refreshed and gain the strength to complete the journey. So you kind of talk about that being the final destination so that they have great energy to get to that at least. If they get to that and then you get them there and they have some time to kind of abide in some restful state, then you can say, I hate to tell you, but this isn't the final destination. We're going to go all the way to this, other place. Then you can bring them there much more easily. Otherwise, people would get discouraged and not enter into the path at all. If you taught only one path, the Mahayana, and said, that's it for everybody, there's no other way to proceed. You have to go the full distance all the way to enlightenment. Of course, those of us who are trying to practice the Mahayana path and have that mentality do recognize at times the daunting level that's involved in progressing all the way from our unenlightened state to Buddhahood. But nonetheless, it actually is said that you have less time and a quicker path if you do that right from the beginning versus going to this island, attaining arhatship through the paths of the fundamental vehicles and then eventually going on to Buddhahood. Because again, the amount of time you spend in this solitary peace on that island kind of that idea, then you will end up wasting time in a sense. Another point that's raised there is that, again, there is the nirvana that they're being encouraged to attain does have some qualities, but again, it doesn't have these ultimate qualities. It's not an ultimate nirvana. So again, the Buddha did try to get beings to a place where they could have some freedom from defilement, some freedom from suffering and what have you, but essentially wanted everyone to eventually go to the full state of enlightenment. And this is a skillful means that the Buddha used in order to accomplish that for those beings who would get fatigued at the concept of going all the way to enlightenment right from the get-go. So that's what's covered in this next part, where he kind of is the teaching of the three ultimate liberations has an underlying meaning. Liberation as the indivisibility of these four qualities is only found in the Buddha and so on. So I don't think I need to teach much more on that. Now we get to kind of the example, the totality of the qualities as illustrated by the example of the painters. Kind of an interesting example. It says this begins in the non-afflicted sphere, emptiness endowed with every supreme aspect, dot, dot, dot. This passage teaches a wisdom realizing emptiness, perfected in every type of insight and abandonment. Again, insight or realizations and abandonment, the two main qualities if we summarize them all. And the suchness of that wisdom, pure of all defilement, as being an emptiness endowed with every supreme aspect. It does not teach an ultimate truth empty of all conventional existence, because such an ultimate truth has no qualities whatsoever. It's kind of saying you would never have emptiness or ultimate truth abiding in a state completely apart from something else, because that's not how emptiness abides. It abides together with phenomena. So we're talking about the emptiness that is endowed with every supreme aspect, kind of both the ultimate truth, the emptiness, together with the conventional truth, all of the aspects, the qualities. In Buddhahood, you have the culmination of those two. And we're not talking about an emptiness that is abiding in some separate way, rather, the emptiness of the mind together with all the qualities of the Buddha. That's what we mean, again, by the suchness that is free of all impurities, that is completely pure, that we talked about a short while ago. The example that's being used here is kind of, again, a curious one. You've got kind of painters. There's a king who wants their picture, their portrait painted, and they have people who paint different parts more expertly than others. And so if you have one of them missing, that they can't fill in the whole picture, then you don't have the fullness of Buddhahood in a similar way. You don't have all the qualities present. So it says here, for example, painters who are specialized in painting individual parts of the body paint whatever part is known to them and do not work on any other part than that. This is maybe kind of not true of many painters. They learn how to paint hands and feet and torsos and heads and whatever. But anyway, this is the concept. You have different things that are skilled in producing different parts of a portrait. To them, a sovereign king hands a canvas and orders these painters, all of you, paint my portrait. Upon hearing this, they begin to collaborate on painting the portrait. Then one of the engaged painters leaves for another place. By departing and leaving their part of the portrait incomplete, the portrait in its entirety could not be actualized. This is the way the example is applied, meaning that if you don't have all the factors that contribute to the full development of Buddhahood, namely all six of the perfections, those are the main means of accomplishing enlightenment, then you don't have the ability to attain that state because there's something lacking. The full portrait isn't there. So the method to create of these four aspects of enlightened qualities is the method to create these. It shouldn't be of in there. The method.
Oh, we can't hear you, Dawn.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Up here. Okay, sorry about that. The batteries just ended. They attained a non-abiding nirvana. So, all right. So, okay, let me start again. The method to create these four aspects of enlightened qualities is the wisdom realizing the emptiness perfected in every excellent quality, such as the perfection of giving, and which can be summarized as being the path of the practitioner, the Mahayana practitioner, because from the completion of this path arises the qualities of the Buddha. Again, only by all six perfections being brought to their full culmination, not just the perfection of wisdom. That is the main one that removes all of the stains, but we need it in tandem with all of the other perfections. For example, there's a group of painters who are individually skilled in drawing different parts of the body, such as the head. Those who know how to draw the head, for example, are not sure how to draw other parts. The king orders them, all of you, paint my complete portrait on this canvas, and hands them the canvas. The painters hear the command of the king, and each sets about drawing what he is skilled in. One of the painters leaves his work and goes to another country, which means that a painter skilled in drawing a particular part of the body is missing. Therefore, that part of the body's missing, so the complete painting cannot be finished. So this is the correlation of that, the meaning of that example. The individual parts of the portrait are expressions of generosity, discipline or morality, patience, and so on, meaning joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom, all 6 perfections. Emptiness, which is endowed with all aspects, meaning that state we just talked about, where you have the emptiness of the mind together with all of the qualities, is expressed by the complete portrait of the king. All right, that's what we're aiming for, is the complete portrait. Emptiness endowed with every supreme aspect is the reality of the perfect Buddha. Again, the ultimate truth of the Buddha, the emptiness of the Buddha, together with all the qualities of the Buddha, arising from the meditational development of wisdom and merit accumulations. You need the accumulation of both, divorced from all adventitious defilement, and also the exalted wisdom of the Buddha, constantly placed in meditative equipoise upon suchness, and adorned with every aspect of method, such as the perfection of giving. So, on the path, the meditative concentration of the union of calm abiding and special insight, directly realizing emptiness endowed with every supreme aspect, is adorned with the aspects of method, such as the perfection of giving. It's a lot of words pointing to that kind of basic truth. You're going to have a need to bring both aspects to culmination, the method aspect and the wisdom aspect. You're not going to be able to do them separately, or you don't have the complete portrait. You don't have the Dharmakaya. In the example, wisdom and merit accumulation is illustrated by the action of painting. What is this accumulation? Giving is summed up by the mind that gives away one's body, possession, and virtues for the sake of all sentient beings. Ethics can be summed up by the keeping of the common vows that bind the destructive circumstances that oppose ethics, and by the special attitude of giving up working to attain nirvana for oneself alone. Patience is the patience needed in analyzing and understanding Dharma, the patience of willingly accepting suffering, and third, the patience that gives no ground to anger, and so forth. With these, and similarly with the 4th perfection, effort, the 5th, concentration, and wisdom, and so forth, the stages along the path are completed in dependence on conventional truth and ultimate truth to finally produce the perfect Buddha, in whose mind stream is the exalted wisdom, realizing emptiness, endowed with every supreme aspect. This is illustrated in the sutras by the complete portrait of the king. So again, that's the idea behind this, how this is correlating, is that you need all of those method aspects that are together with the perfection of wisdom, realizing emptiness, for it to come to its full culmination. So, where am I at? Let me just make sure, and I'm kind of running out of time here for tonight. So let's go through this next paragraph. Again, it says, what is this emptiness endowed with every aspect taught in the sutras? It is taught as the completion of giving, the completion of ethics. In other words, the completion of all the qualities. That's what we mean by it. It's completing the full qualities in a conventional sense, as well as the ultimate wisdom, realizing emptiness, the ultimate truth. Therefore, the assertion that emptiness endowed with every supreme aspect is the ultimate truth, adorned with all excellent qualities, such as the 10 powers, and has existed in the continuum of sentient beings since beginningless time, is an assertion no different to that of the Ishvaras, outsiders, who propound a permanent and self-arising omniscience. It's just saying we can't say that that full culmination, having brought to that level of development, is present in the mind of beings. Rather, the potential is present in the minds of beings. Otherwise, we'd be similar to these outsiders who propound a permanent and self-arising omniscience. Again, I don't know much about them. None of the commentators really talked about it so much. But then there's also the Samkhyas, and they would say that they believe in a permanent yet functional phenomenon as an ultimate truth, and assert that all conventional truths are expressions of it. Again, they would be no different than these Samkhyas, anyone who asserted in a similar way, because this school also asserts a universal source as a permanent but functional phenomenon, which exists as the ultimate reality. Again, this is just kind of getting into views that would be contrary. If we say that kind of there's some other way that this is abiding, no, it is a product of the path that we have to engage in, of doing the full painting, of engaging in all 6 perfections, and so on. It's not something that abides in any other type of way. but rather as the product of all of that development. So do not malign the undefiled teachings of the Buddha, he says, by declaring such non-existent and erroneous superimpositions to be the thinking behind the ultimate teachings of the Bhagawan, such as even in the Kalachakra Tantra, where this commentary on it uses examples of a vase and space to illustrate that there is no trace of anything existing by its own nature. And yet all activity and function is perfectly validated, thereby presenting the two truths in perfect accord with their explanation by the great guide Nagarjuna. So again, I wasn't going to go through this next section anyway, but essentially kind of summarize it in terms of, let's go to, I know I'm going a little over into our discussion time, but I want to share with you kind of what gets covered in this section. This is from the bottom of page 165 to the middle of 167. And what I said earlier is that they do this talking about the three pure grounds or bhumis. And so as it says here in this little extract of the commentary from Geshe Jampa Gyaltsen, he says that they discuss that whole section in detail, which again, I'm not going to do. But the essential points were the causes producing these four indivisible qualities of the Buddha and how to obtain them. They're divided into three. Again, we talked about the three that are the realization of the vast, the realization of the profound, and the abandonment. Remember, we talked about those being the three that they were being condensed into. They are, again, in all three pure bhumis, all three pure grounds, we develop those qualities on them that are perfected at Buddhahood. So at the eighth ground, the knower of the paths is attained. That is, on the eighth bhumi, that knower of the path is spontaneous and natural, an unbroken stream. The knower of the paths is attained on the path of seeing. At the ninth, there is the gaining every sacred Dharma of the Buddhas, and at the 10th is the gaining of the insight into every subtle mystery. Again, these terms were talked about in that section, but it's not so important. We're just talking about, again, a method whereby we can attain all of these qualities through the final purification of the mind that happens on the pure grounds. They're called pure grounds, again, because the mind of that bodhisattva is pure to some degree, from having removed all the afflictive obscurations, but is still working on developing the full purity through removing the knowledge obscurations, the obscurations to Buddhahood. In brief, the qualities of a Buddha are produced at the time of the pure bhumis, and they have specific causes. Therefore, we understand that the hearer and solitary realizer arhats do not attain these qualities of the Buddha because they do not produce the causes of the three pure grounds. Again, because in essence, when we talk about the bodhisattva's development, they develop their mind up to the same level of abandonment as a arhat. The arhats go to that level, which again is at the end of the seventh ground as you enter into the eighth ground for the bodhisattva. But it's the end of the line in terms of the Hinayana path, the fundamental vehicle path. And they go off and check out into their solitary peace. Meanwhile, the bodhisattva continues to develop complete purity by, on the three pure grounds, removing all of the remaining obscurations and developing all of the respective qualities that are culminated in these four qualities that we've been talking about in this section. That's the essence of what we're going into there. I don't know that we need to be able to kind of look at much more, maybe as a closing sort of punctuation mark on that section. I'll go back very briefly to the commentary, go forward to page 167. I think it was 167. Whoops. Here I have to go up a little bit. See this very last paragraph, teaching that these qualities do not exist in hearers and solitary realizers. It says the hearer arhats and the solitary realizers are far from the sphere of nirvana that is indivisible from the attainments of the four qualities. Why? The exalted wisdom of the pure levels is the basis of the four qualities. And so these four bases or exalted wisdom of those levels are not found in the hearer and solitary realizer. Therefore, this teaches that those two, do not attain the ultimate nirvana. They attain a nirvana, but it's only a temporary nirvana. It's not complete nirvana. Again, because they go on to attain the ultimate nirvana eventually. So I didn't get to finish this section. I was kind of hoping to, but obviously there was more to explain. What we're going to get to next week is we'll start with this analogy that illustrates indivisibility. And by the way, I didn't go through any of the slides tonight, in part because they mostly talk about this final section, verses 94 and 95 in Geshe Loden's book. Remember, I've been sharing Geshe Loden's presentation on each of these 10 as we go through. And for him, I mean, he didn't really talk about the initial things so much. He kind of referred to them very loosely, but he really highlighted the last couple of verses, 94 and 95. So we'll start with that next time. And that's where we get into this. I think it is on your homework or the discussion for tonight, which again, we don't have too much time for, but at least a little bit of time. That is one of the questions. So don't worry about that question for now. By the way, I didn't go back to this little outline when we were talking about immutability, but I don't think I necessarily needed to. Where is it? There it is. Okay, so for tonight, with the remaining time we have, feel free to modify your discussion as you wish, but these are the two main things, questions 1 and 2. Looking at the last of the 3 states in terms of this completely pure state, identify and explain the 4 main points that were discussed. Again, they were also on your chart. Then regarding the 10th of the 10 presentations, indivisibility of qualities. What purpose does it serve? What are the 4 qualities set out in these verses that are indivisibly possessed by a perfect Buddha? What are the points made in regard to the significance of the indivisibility of those 4 qualities? In terms of showing that, that what is on the chart in terms of the significance of that those on the Hinayana path do not attain those full qualities and so on. How is the totality of the indivisible qualities attained, and what are the implications of that? Again, in brief, we didn't go into it in great detail. The third question has to do with 94 and the correlating explanation that goes with it, so you can just hold off on that one. All right, so again, we do have a little bit of time to do that. If you would like to maybe spend almost 20 minutes, just before, maybe like 3 or 4 minutes before the top of the hour, we'll resume and kind of see if there are any questions from that discussion. Okay? Hello. Yeah, sorry to interrupt your discussion. To what you were saying, Sean, with the last little bit that I heard, I haven't been listening to what you all have been talking about till this very end. I mean, the Nirmanakaya and Sambhogakaya of a Buddha are not mental bodies. I mean, they're an emanation of a Buddha in terms of the Nirmanakaya, or the enjoyment body, that is the body that is going to abide in that pure land of that Buddha for eternity. So there's a difference. Because again, these mental bodies are created through the force of uncontaminated karma, but go through a process, as we saw, of kind of coming into existence, transforming through time, and then eventually just deteriorating into death, and then another one arising. So there is some conditionality with regard to those, whereas these form bodies of a Buddha are not kind of, I mean, they exhibit that. Like I said, you can have a form body of a Buddha, such as we all think His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the emanation of the Buddha Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion. And that will show that aspect of it, but there is no real deterioration going on. There's no death, there's no birth, there's no aging, illness, what have you. So I guess it's different. Again, these are very subtle. Like was said, there was an inconceivable transformation in regard to those mental bodies. It's maybe equally or more inconceivable in terms of how various physical manifestations of the body of the Buddha occur. Form bodies are a bit of a mystery, because they appear as ordinary beings to us, at least in terms of people like His Holiness and what have you. But nonetheless, they are said to be the enlightened mind of a Buddha appearing in form. There's no conditionality around it in regard to the Buddha side. There's only in regard to our appearance of that in our conditioned world. So a bit mysterious. Were there any questions? Yeah.
I noticed we were running into some between what was it, permanence and gotta find my chart again.
Permanent and unchanging, Don. So we're going back to immutability. And we were just going off the chart to discuss the first question. And we thought that when it comes to the four qualities
of the Dharma.
of the Tathagata, permanent and unchanging sounded very similar to us. And just by looking at what it said on the chart, we couldn't really distinguish the two.
Yeah. These do start sounding kind of similar. I have to admit, in my preparation today, I was like trying to keep all these concepts clear in my mind. Again, I mean, when we talk about what they're correlated with in terms of the negation, it's no birth and no death. But again, that means that whole kind of conditionality of kind of coming into the world and going out of the world. There's this eternal sort of quality, which is also similar to it being constant. I mean, so you kind of have this overlaying of a lot of these kind of concepts, permanence being very similar to some of the other ones. But again, the idea is that within each of these, you do have maybe a slightly different aspect. It's not very clear. I agree from what's on the chart. It has inexhaustible qualities that are unending. That's what makes it permanent. Whereas it is, not born from afflicted or non-afflicted karma. That's what makes it unchanging. They're both speaking to the same state, but just a different sliver of it, if you will. The qualities that have been attained that are unending, that go on, and then that's what makes it permanent. And then the not having any sort of conditionality from any sort of karma, whether it be afflicted or non-afflicted, is what makes it unchanging. So again, but they're speaking to the same experience, if you will. Yeah, Stephen.
Oh, thanks, Don. And the first one, permanent, how it's phrased on the chart says it has no birth and death through karma and afflictions. So we know that. Or the latencies of afflictions. We wondered there if that actually just meant the seeds of afflictions, or did that actually mean the knowledge obscurations?
It's the knowledge obscurations. Those are the latencies. If it was seeds, it would generally say seeds. I know these are all kind of very subtle phenomena. What is a seed is something that gives rise to the same thing. Just like an apple seed gives rise to apples eventually through the process of producing an apple tree and so on. Whereas the latencies are the imprints, the subtle predisposition or predispositions that are left on the mind that produce something that is related but not the same.
So seeds would be the substantial cause.
Oh, well, seeds would be the cause of producing that affliction again.
Yeah.
Latencies arise from the ignorance and give rise to false appearance. They don't give rise to further ignorance, though they can be a factor in it. Obviously, for ordinary beings like ourselves, we created both of those. We have the seeds of ignorance that are arising in our minds to give us ignorance again, but we also have the false appearance of things inherently existing, which arises from the latencies. And that's why we cling to that false appearance, is because it's a factor in it, but it's not what causes the ignorance in a direct way. The ignorance is caused by the seeds of ignorance. Yeah. So seeds is generally that which is kind of in the same continuum as it, that will produce something that is identical to it in nature. And then the latencies are what's the kind of the trail left by it that produces its own result. In this case, in the dualistic appearance, things appearing to exist inherently. Okay. Since it's about 5 after, maybe we should conclude, unless there was, again, maybe one small question. I don't know. John? Stephen? Nothing else? Okay.
Well, no, I couldn't get my thing unmuted.
That's all right.
Well, so we were still kind of stumped, though. Are they just talking about the birth and death aspect? Because there's still afflictions, like you stop having the birth and death at the first bhumi, but there's still afflictions that you're removing from.
Yeah, again, from the first bhumi on, you no longer have birth and death through the force of contaminated karma, but rather you have birth and death through compassion. I mean, you still take rebirth through compassion and produce a conditioned body that eventually dies, and then you take rebirth again through compassion and so on. And that's again prior to removing the afflictions. Once you've attained the eighth ground and above, then you have a different process with this mental body. So again, a Buddha would not be subject to either type of rebirth and death, which would be the one caused by contaminated karma that gives, because as a bodhisattva, you're not using you're not under the control of contaminated karma, but that still is karma that you created kind of through the force of good deeds and what have you that ripens into a good rebirth. You control it through the force of your compassion. In fact, it said, through your compassion, you could even be reborn in unfavorable states of existence before you've removed the afflictive obscurations, like, being reborn as an animal or in a hell realm or whatever. So again, the idea is that there's a conditionality still in regard to those bodhisattvas who haven't removed all the afflictive obscurations, even though they're being reborn through the force of compassion. They still have some conditionality around that. Once you attain the pure grounds, you have this mental body that goes through a similar process. You're no longer involved with any type of, contaminated karma. It's only uncontaminated karma that causes you to have this mental body that takes rebirth. And then when you attain Buddhahood, you're free from any of those types of birth or death. Okay. That's how I understand it. Again, it's very subtle in terms of how all this is happening. But yeah. All right. If you have further questions that come up, again, be sure to bring them forward. I didn't give really a chance for people to ask questions at the beginning of tonight, but I'll try to do that next week. Because I know this section was really dense. There's a lot of stuff in here, and I taught it rather quickly. I realized that. Maybe I'll go over a few of the points next week as we begin, just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page. Because there's if you look at the chart doesn't do justice to the whole section in some ways. Doesn't really cover everything that's in there. And I don't know. I'm not about to produce a new chart. I don't think that's kind of identical to this, but I may produce something that will give a little more clarity about the different ways that we were talking about these qualities. I'm still not absolutely clear in my own mind what is the correlation between all of these. But you do seem to be talking about these four main qualities, and then at one point they get condensed into realization and abandonment, and then at one point they get even elaborated into the two types of realizations and then the one abandonment. And then we're going to have those three that come around in verses 94 and 95 that essentially are being compared to the sun again, but in terms of three different aspects. So, all right, let's do our dedication prayers. So let me put those on the screen. Okay. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Oops, made it twice. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. I've redone this little prayer thing and I've put in the verses for Rinpoche. So let's turn our attention now to our teachers, making prayers for His Holiness and all our other gurus to have good health and long life, and then, of course, for Rinpoche to return swiftly. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones. May the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And lastly, just dedicate for all those beings that you're holding in your heart, whoever it is that we know or have heard of who are experiencing illness, obstacles, who are dying or who have died recently, sending this positive energy out to them so they can be free from their suffering and find all the causes that will help them to attain perfect peace and happiness. And may all beings have this result through our being here tonight, engaging in these teachings. Okay, thank you all. So again, I do want to let people know, I meant to do this earlier. I will be here in person only for 2 more Thursdays because unfortunately I have to go back and care for my mom while my brother, who normally cares for her, is having surgery. And you can keep him in your prayers. His name is Daryl, same last name, of course, but he's having heart surgery on October 12th. And so I need to go back. I'll be here for the next week, which is the 28th, and then October 5th. On the 6th, I leave for my mom's, and I'll be there until November 1st. So the remaining Thursdays in October, I won't be here physically, but we'll do teachings on Zoom. And then I will be back in person November until the course concludes on December 5th, I think it is, or somewhere in there, December 8th. I don't know. I don't remember the exact day. So, all right. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that, though we'll announce it again as we get closer to that time. Thank you.